and welcome to another Mansions of Madness painting video. Today I am going to be painting the Lloigor? Okay, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce this, so I'm just going to call it Centipede Spiky Death Thing, or Spike for short. Before I get started painting here, remember to hit that subscribe button if you would like to see more Mansions of Madness painting videos. This is the last of the Streets of Arkham expansion, and then I will be tackling some of the other expansions and maybe even the core box at some point. Now this model was interesting to paint. Unfortunately, the artwork that comes in the second edition is really very vague. There's sort of no color in the picture. It's sort of a dark night scene, so you don't really know. So for me, I had to kind of go online and try to figure out what sort of colors this creature may have. And you find a lot of greens. And the original model that was released as just sort of a special Mansions of Madness model is very green with some dark green and some brown in it. And that's kind of what I was going for with this. But anyways, to tackle this model, the first thing I did was zenithal highlighting. I used spray cans, so I just first base coated it with black and then did a spray basically aiming straight down of white. If you don't want to do zenithal highlighting, you could of course just base paint in gray. The next thing I did was take a really large flat brush, and essentially I'm painting almost the entirety of the model in Nurgling Green. The places I'm trying to avoid are the tips of the claws, but if you hit them, it's really not that big of a deal. And also the top of the head and the mouth. Those are the sort of areas I'm trying to avoid. Otherwise, everything else, Nurgling Green. Next up, I started with the head, and basically I'm going to do some wet blending here. So every single color that I'm using here, I mixed with some medium to basically make the drying time a little bit longer so I could blend those colors in a little bit easier. Essentially, I'm going to do a gradient here from Dryad Bark to Nurgling Green, and basically the last bit of Nurgling Green is going to be mixed in with just a smidge of that Dryad Bark. The nice thing about this model is it's kind of a carapace, so there's different sections. And essentially the very first section I made almost completely pure Dryad Bark. The second section is more Dryad Bark with a little bit more Nurgling Green, and then so forth and so on. And I'm only doing this for the 4 sections at the very top. As I was scouring the figure, I did notice a couple of pronounced mold lines. Some of them I couldn't really hit just because of where they are, but one of them was on the foot here, and I just tried to remove it a little bit. Now yes, I am scraping off a little bit of paint, so I went back over it with the regular paint. It should still stick. There's really no problem here. Just letting you know that you can remove mold lines pretty much whenever. Of course, the earlier you remove them, kind of the easier it is, but just if you miss a spot here and there, it's always okay to just kind of scrape it off, repaint things. It'll still stick. Your paint will be fine. As I'm going along here, I'm not going to show everything that I did, but just if there's any sort of mistakes or areas you missed, just make sure to go over them. I did that a few times here. I missed an area here or there and just kind of went over them. Next up, I went for the mouth area, and this entire area I painted Bugman's Glow. Next up, I tackled the eyes a little bit, and basically I just filled them in with Fire Dragon Bright. Next up, I hit basically 90% of the figure with a wash, and this is mostly just the skin area. I used Biel-Tan Green. I took a medium small brush and basically hit everywhere. The only place I really sort of avoided the carapace that's sort of on the back neck area. And of course, try to avoid the claws if you can. After that has dried, I went back over the figure, did sort of a dry brush of Nurgling Green back over the skin. This is not a complete dry brush. There is still a fair amount of paint on my brush, but I'm really just trying to hit sort of the big areas and not really get any sort of the crevices or anything. So I am wiping away quite a bit of paint. I hit the skin with a second coat of green paint. I used Skarsnik Green. I didn't notice that much of a difference between the two tones, so I would consider this color completely optional if you wanted to follow mine. Next up though, I did use Moot Green. This is much more of a dry brush. I'm really trying to use kind of as little as possible and really just hit the raised sort of edges. Next up for the claws themselves, I use Steel Legion Drab. I use Steel Legion Drab also for the teeth. This is just going to be an initial layer. And then I finally tackled that carapace on the back of the neck. For this, I went with another gradient. I blended up from Caliban Green all the way up to Nurgling Green. For the front carapace, I just mixed Caliban Green with a little tiny bit of Nurgling Green, and basically this mix I'm going to use quite a bit. Then the spines on his back, I used this same sort of mix to basically get these really dark spines. Lastly, towards the bottom of the tail there are these bits of carapace that seem to be more pronounced than the rest of the body. And I decided to make these look sort of like the armor on the front. So I'm using the same colors here and just kind of going over the top, blending them, making the bottoms of the carapace look a little bit lighter than the tops. I use the same colors on the spikes sticking out of the claw at the end of the tail. I went back over these with Moot Green as well, just to kind of give a little bit more variety in the tone. I use Caliban Green to hit all the warts and pimples across the figure. I finally tackled the second layer on the teeth, which is going to be Screaming Skull. Lastly, I hit the tips of the teeth with pure white. And then I'm highlighting the actual mouth itself. So for this, I'm using a mix between Bugman's Glow and Cadian Fleshtone. Lastly, on the eyes, I'm hitting them with a bit of Mephiston Red just to give them a nice red iris. At this point, I sealed the figure up with some varnish, and then I brought it back. Basically, we're going to do a few optional things here. First of all, I watered down some Ard Coat, stuck them on the claws, on the feet, and the hands just to give them a little bit of a shine and kind of this gleam. Now here's another first for me. I'm trying to put some saliva effects here on the figure. And to do this, you really need to use an adhesive. Now I'm using Gorilla Glue adhesive, which I actually really wouldn't recommend. This was kind of a last minute, and I was trying to find something, and this is the first thing that worked for me. I've heard from several things. Uhu glue is probably the best to go with. I couldn't find that anywhere here in California, but it is very possible to get it from Amazon. I just wanted to get something a little bit quicker. Gorilla Glue adhesive here, it worked just fine. It was a little stickier than I would like, but I think that made just me struggling to work with it. That being said, I would highly recommend having some sort of toothpick or something that you can use to kind of manipulate it. I'm using a terrain thing, but it's really not what I would recommend to do this. I essentially kind of just did this on the fly, and it somewhat messy, but it turned out to have pretty neat effect. I wish I could have had maybe just a little bit of ooze sort of dripping from its mouth, but it's kind of difficult to control this stuff, especially as you pull away from the figure and you're not connecting to anything. It'll just sort of drip and doesn't quite cut right. That being said, all of this stuff here right at the end, completely optional. And at this point, the figure is done. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, leave a comment below, and I will see you next painting video. Bye.